Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. Today's video is on another video on our continuing series of Global War 1936 to 1945 Nations for version 3. So we are almost done this video series. We've only got 2 left. The last one is going to be China. I'm going to do all of the factions in China on one video. And then this video, which is the USA. Now the USA is a complicated nation, that's for sure. Here, let me try doing this, get rid of that shadow there. There we go. Yeah, so the USA is a complicated nation. There's a lot of rules regarding it, just because of all the restrictions put on it. And also, when I first went through the national reference sheets, I thought, there's not much changes or anything, until I put it right beside the version 2 reference sheet and noticed just exactly what the changes were. And there's quite a number of them, but they're subtle though. Like if you were like me and you just read through the national reference sheet, you would have thought, oh, that's the same. But it's not really. But we'll get through those. I'll tell you what they are, what the changes are, what they used to be, and what they are now for that, okay? So let's get started. First of all, like all the other nations, we're going to start with the income and production. So the total of the land zones, or the wartime income for the United States, is 63 IPP. That's if you were to add up every one of the United States and all the islands and everything that the United States has, it would add up to 63. But in 1936, they only start with 6 IPPs. Very, very small income. And that's because they just, they did not want to be part of this war. They thought, you know what, we're on the other side of the world. Those people can just have their war, you know what I mean? And let's just take care of our own here, right? I mean, the whole world was just coming out of the Great Depression, and so the Americans just did not want any part of that. In 1936, the war was a long ways away from where they wanted to be, right? Anyway, and then in 1939, they were still quite a ways away. So in 1939, your starting income is 16 IPP. For the most part, though, I play the 36 game. I think it's a better game, and most of the rules pertain to the 36 because of the lower income levels. You know what happens at those lower income levels, and so we're going to key on those for the most part. So the home country is now the home country is both. Like, I guess I'm just going to have to move the camera around for you. I was going to describe it, but I'll just move it. So it's all what you see there, the green parts that you see there. They call that the lower 48. I mean, there's not 48 land zones on the game board, but there's 48 states in the lower United States. So right there, not including Panama. Panama is over here with the American on it. That's not included. So those states right there in the eastern United States and these states right here in the western United States. That does not include Alaska or that other territory there, whatever that is, and these islands. Doesn't include Midway, doesn't include Hawaii, doesn't include Wake Island or the Philippines or anything. The only thing it is right there, the western United States, and like I showed you earlier, right there, the eastern United States, okay? So that's the only home country. And their war status, like I said, they're at peace in 1936 and 1939. They cannot declare war until they reach that threshold of 63. As far as Lend-Lease goes, they're limited in their ability to Lend-Lease. They can't Lend-Lease until they're at their income level. A lot of the things that happen with the Americans are determined upon their income level. Like they start the game at 15, right? Or sorry, at 6. So it's not until they get to 15 IPP that they can actually Lend-Lease to anybody. And when they do, they can only Lend-Lease to nations they're at war with a major power. The other thing to do with Lend-Lease is, here, you know what? I'm just going to take you up to the other side of the board over there. As we walk around here, So the other thing is there's a convoy line for the Soviet Union, for the Russians here, and I'll show you that right here. So this convoy line right here, you see there's no number on there. Usually with all the convoy lines, there is some number associated with them. Like here's the German one. It's we got a number 3 there, right? Well, with this one, there is no number on there. What that convoy line is it represents the Lend-Lease that the Russians would get from the Allies, particularly the Americans. And so, if there's no submarines on that convoy line, for like any enemy submarines, for the Russians there, then they will get 2 IPP, and that convoy line goes all the way up here. So as long as there's no enemy submarines on there, then they get 2 IPP. But the Americans get to decide whether or not they actually get to collect that money. Let's go over here for a while. So, if you're the American player, then like you kind of gauge what's going on in the game, right? Like if the Russians are being aggressive towards your other allies, France and Great Britain, like if they're just being a real dick, right? Then you just say, you know what? No, you're not getting that $2, and you're not getting it next turn either. Not until you prove that you're actually, gonna actually fight on our side and fight against the Axis. If you're just going to come after us and leave the Axis alone, then you're not getting that money. And that's not a big deal. It's only 2 IPPs, but it's something, right? It's something the Americans could do anyway, to try to snap the Russians back into being on their side, like they're supposed to be. I mean, there's 3 sides in this game, but those 2 sides, the Comintern and the Allies, have to work together if they're going to beat the Axis, right? So that's something that you can do. Now, as far as special minor power alignment conditions, before we get to that, let's just talk about the Monroe Doctrine, because it has a lot to do with this. So what the Monroe Doctrine is, it was a real thing, right? And so this is the Western Hemisphere here, like the North and South America, and like North America over there, right? It's kind of weird how it's split up like that, but you had to split the map somewhere, right? So that's the Western Hemisphere. And the United States, they were insistent, like, we're not going to go to war, but if any of you guys come over to the Western Hemisphere, then we're going to war. Basically, was what they said. Unless you want us jumping all over you, you stay out of North and South and Central America. And for lack of a better way to put it, that's what it is. So I'll just read it to you here. USA has a special doctrine known as the Monroe Doctrine, which claims all of North and South America off limits to foreign colonization. The Monroe Doctrine allows USA to attack any foreign powers any foreign major powers units that are bordering North or South America land zones, indifferent to its own income level and without declaring war. USA is also allowed to attack captured land zones in North and South America. Now, when they talk about captured land zones, they're not talking about in the United States there, because if there was a captured land zone there, then they would be at war, right? What they're talking about is, like, if you were to capture any Canadian land zone, like say the Germans came over and landed somewhere in Canada or in Newfoundland there, then the United States would attack them back, and that would not put the United States at a state of war. Like, even if they're only at 10 income and that happened, they can still do that, right? Because the Monroe Doctrine is being violated. And also down here as well, right? In South America. So there's one thing where the Germans can try once per game to roll for Argentina. Well, they can still attack Argentina if it did go to the Germans, because they still don't want them down there, right? Just any land zone in North and South America. Now, that leads us to the special alignment conditions. That's what we're talking about, minor powers, and all of these are minor powers, right? We also refer to them as neutrals. So with the Pan American nations, and that's what we call them, is Pan American nations, because they span from north and central to South American, right? If you consider Mexico a North American nation. So the Pan American nations: Cuba, Central America, Brazil, Mexico, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay, Colombia, and Venezuela, not all of them, but most of them there basically, can be aligned by the U.S. as follows. The USA may make an attempt to align these nations once per turn, once the USA is at war with a major power. So once the United States is at war, they're at that 63 income level, and they're at war with a major power, then they can try to align all of these nations down here that I listed, okay? So what happens is the USA player can pay up to 3 IPP and roll a D12. If the roll is less than or equal to the IPPs paid, then the nation will align with the US immediately. Like let's say they're going to try with, let's say they're going to try Brazil here. And they pay 3 IPP, and then they have to roll a 3 or less. If they only paid 2 IPP, then they'd have to roll a 2 or less in order to align them, right? So whatever they pay, that's what they have to roll or less to try to align that. So the IPPs paid to influence are lost regardless of the outcome. Income from aligned nations is added to the USA's peacetime income. You know what? That doesn't make sense to me. I'll get back to you in 1 second here. So I'm reading this right off of the 4.4, the Allied Alignment Condition Table. And it says, like I just said there, that the income from allied nations is added to the USA's peacetime income. But a little bit earlier it said that the USA can only do this once they're at war. So I'm going to just go out on a limb and say that it should just say USA's income, not peacetime income. And if there needs to be a change, then I'll redo this part of the video where that changes, and I'll give you the right thing. But just assume that that should say USA's income, and then I'll get them to change that in the rule book. So the last thing about this is if the Axis had convoyed this line here, you see there's a convoy line here. If they had convoyed at the turn that you're making that roll, then you have to add +1 to that roll. So that means like that means that the nations down there are kind of alarmed about this, you know, that the Axis are being belligerent, and so they're more likely to go. So if you paid $3, then you would have to roll a 4 or less, and that's if the Axis had convoyed that line there on the turn that you make the attempt to roll. So the United States can roll as many nations as they want on a turn. Let me see here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 11 of them that I listed off, and they could roll all 11 of them if they wanted on one turn, but they can't roll each nation more than once. So that's probably not going to happen. Like they're probably going to pick 4 or 5 of them or something, depending on how much they can afford, right? And they'll roll a few, and then the next turn they'll try to roll some. So that's the alignment, the special alignment conditions for the United States. As far as the surrender condition goes for the United States, it's probably not likely that it's ever going to happen. But like, to begin with, Washington is the capital, right? So if Washington gets taken, then you can move your capital. And there's 4 different capitals that you can use for the United States. So there's Washington, New York, Chicago, and then over here, let's just go to the other side. Then there's San Francisco, where you see all this cluster of stuff here. So what would happen is all 4 of those territories would have to be taken over, and then you'd go around to the turn order until it was the American turn. After the last one was taken over, you go to the American turn, and then the American has until the end of their own turn there to regain that last capital. If they can't regain it, then they're out of the game. So that's a change from the last version of the rules. Before, you just had to take the capital, and then boom, they were gone, right? Now you get a chance to get your capital back, and that goes true for everybody in the game except for, I believe, France, and of course the minor powers as well, right? So let's just go to the declarations of war now. Now, I'm going to get to that in a second here. Okay, so then the declaration of war conditions for the United States are as follows. So a neutral minor, like the minor powers, we also call them neutrals. Yeah, once you're at war with a major power, you can declare war on a minor power, but you're going to have to pay a 10 IPP penalty, and that penalty can be dispersed amongst all of the allies, right? Although if it's the United States declaring war, they'll probably pay for it themselves because because they're going to have more money than everybody else, right? So there's that, and then like with the other nations that we talked about already, Great Britain and France, there was a -8 against the Americans, a hit to their peacetime bonus income. You're not going to get that because you're at war now. That -8 was to keep the Americans out of the war longer. It was meant as a penalty against the Allies, but once the Americans are at war, it's too late for that -8. So it's just going to be a 10 penalty. And I suppose that would hold true for the other Allies as well. Like if Great Britain wanted to declare war on a minor and the Americans were already at war with a major power, then I don't see how they could pay that -8 penalty. So they couldn't declare war against the other allies, right? They can't declare war against the KMT or against the Commonwealth, like any of the Commonwealth nations, and they couldn't declare war against France or Free France. But I mean, that should go without saying, right? Against the Axis, though, they can declare war, but they have to be at that wartime income of 63 IPP, and they can't declare war on an Axis power that hasn't already declared war on another nation. Now, that could be a major power or it could be a minor power. So, for instance, if Italy hasn't attacked anybody yet, if all they've done is Abyssinia down there and Albania, which they're allowed to do without a declaration of war, if they haven't attacked anybody else, then the United States can't declare war on them. But it's likely by the time the United States enters the war that Germany and Japan will have attacked several different people, right? So, it's likely that they would be able to declare war on those two nations. And as far as the Comintern, these are going to be much like the Great Britain and France declarations of war against the Comintern. So it's either Berlin or Tokyo has fallen, so you can declare war on them at that point, but that's not likely. It could happen, but not likely. Or the USSR is currently in possession of an Allied land zone. So let's say, let's just pick this one down here. We've used this as an example before, but let's say it's Transjordan. So Italy goes over, takes out Transjordan, and then Russia goes down there and takes Transjordan from Italy. So then Russia has a choice. They can give that Transjordan back to the British, or they can decide to keep it. Now, if they decide to keep it, then any of the Allies can declare war on Russia. They don't have to do it right away, though. They could, like if it's early in the game, they might think, well, it's not in our best interest to declare war on Russia at this time. So they could just wait. And if while they're waiting, Russia does decide to give that back, then they can no longer declare war against Russia. As long as Russia has given that back at some point in time, then they can't declare war. But once they've declared war, then it's too late for Russia. They could give it back if they want, but it's too late for them to give it back and not be declared war on. So there's that. And then there's USSR has attacked a neutral power land zone. That's wrong. What it should just say is has attacked a neutral power not adjacent to the Soviet home country. So I'll get them to change that. Right now it says land zone. I've already had that question come up, and we've settled that. So let's use these guys as an example here. What did I do with them? Oh, okay. Anyway, so look at here. Let me just move this back a little bit. So you look at Iran here. There's 3 territories for Iran, right? Now, Iran is bordering the Soviet home country here, right? So they're allowed to attack Iran, and they're also allowed to attack this territory here. Even though this territory is not bordering the Soviet home country, they are part of Iran. So they've already declared war on Iran, and Iran is touching that nation, or is touching the Soviet home country. But this one, Iraq here, if they were to declare war on Iraq, then Iraq is not bordering, there's only one land zone, and it's not bordering the Soviet home country. So if they were to declare war on Iraq, then the Allies can declare war on them. But like the last example, though, they don't have to declare war on them right away. They can declare war on them later if they want. But unlike last example, there's no taking that one back, right? There's no giving Iraq back. Once they've taken minor power that is not connected to Russia, now the Allies can declare war on them between that period of time and the end of the game. They're open to doing that. So that's or the last one is if the USSR declares war on any of the Allies, then the United States can declare war on the Comintern, and that's the declarations of war. We talked about how you needed to get to that threshold of 63 IPP on the industrial production chart, and you start at 6. So how do you get there? Well, there's only one way, and that is through the peacetime income increases, and there's several of them, as you might imagine, because America is a long ways from going to war, and so there's a lot that needs to happen for them to change their mind, basically. You know, I mean, there's one thing, and that is if the Axis attack them, like would actually happen, you know, like in Pearl Harbor there's that, right? But short of that, though, I mean, the Americans were moving towards war in Europe and in the Pacific. They would have eventually got there if it wasn't for Pearl Harbor, probably, but that just kind of hastened it along. So let's just go through the things that will happen that'll move you closer and closer towards that 63 threshold. So the first thing is, in July of 1939, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to grab a D12 and you're going to roll it. And whatever that number is, you're going to add that to your income. So that's July of 1939. And then every turn after that, you're going to keep rolling. First thing you do on your turn, you're going to keep rolling that die once and adding that to your income. And you want to do it first because there's income relate determined actions. So, you know, depending on what your income is what you can do that turn, right? So definitely you want to add to your income first before you do anything else. So roll that die first and starting in 39. Next thing, Japan places a new battleship or carrier of any type on the map or on the production chart. Now this is something that I had misunderstood, but I've got it correct now. So this capital ship is already on here. This is a Japanese carrier. So they're not going to have to pay a 1 IPP penalty for putting it on there. But they will have to put a 1 IPP penalty for putting it on the board now. You know, like for placing it over by Japan there. But if say that is gone now you want to build a new carrier, you're going to have to pay 1 IPP just to put it on the chart, and then another IPP just to take it off the chart. So that's 2 IPPs per capital ship. That's carriers, and that's any type of battleship, any type of carriers, and any type of battleship. Now, like the way people used to do it in V2, they would just get it, and they would have a whole bunch of capital ships, you know, battleships and carriers, and get them to the point, because it was a 4-stage build queue, get them to the point where they were 1 away from being paid for, because there wasn't a penalty for putting them on the queue, right? And then on the turn that they were going to declare war on the States, or, you know, like just before, when they knew it was inevitable that the United States was going to roll and get their income increase to 63, then they would pay them all off, you know, all at once, and put them all there and put them all on the board, right? And so just to stop them from gaming it that way now they charge you 1 for putting it down and 1 for putting it on the map. So 2 in total, but only 1 for this one because this one's already on there, right? All right. So Germany or Japan declare war on the USSR. So that's 5 IPP, and that's each. So if Germany declares war, you get 5 on the American income, and then later on Japan declares war, then that's another 5 on the income. Japan declares war on China, that's plus 5. I got the camera showing Japan here because most of the stuff that alarms the Americans are the Japanese things. It's some of it's from Europe, but most of it's over here though. And Japan declares war on the British Commonwealth or France. Now this is a big one. This is 5D12. And this isn't Germany, remember. This is Japan declaring war on the British Commonwealth. So that's why it's such a big deal that the Commonwealth does not declare war on Japan. You know, like if Japan goes and takes the Netherlands, for instance, it's tough for the UK to make that decision to go down there and attack them. Unless the Americans are almost at war already, right? Because 5D12 is a big deal. I mean, you could roll, you know, like 40 or 45 or 50. I mean, that's a pretty high roll, but you know, like 30 is not unreasonable, right? And that's half your income right there. So 5D12 is big time. And then the next one, Japan declares war on any other neutral. So that's 2D12 each time. So they declare war on the Netherlands. That's 2D12. You grab 2 dice and you roll them. Now you add that to the American income. And then they attack Mongolia. That's 2D12. You know, they attack Iran. That's 2D12. So what's next? Germany declares war on the British Commonwealth or France. So that one, the Americans are going to add 5 to their income. Now it's just one or the other, okay? So let's say the Germans go in and they take Paris. You know, they declare war on France and they go in and take Paris. That's plus 5 to the American income. If they also decide that they're going to maybe convoy the British or something, I mean, that's a declaration of war against the Commonwealth. They're not going to get paid for that one. It's just one or the other. It's only 5 IPP once. It's not 5 IPP for each of them, okay? And then same thing with Italy. Italy declares war on France or the British Commonwealth. So that's 5 for either one. It's not 5 each of them, okay? And then here's a really big one. The Axis possess London. So if you take London out, either Germany or Italy, it'd probably be Germany, then that's plus 25. No rolling involved. They're just going to add 25 to the American income. And then the last thing is a negative. So this is something we've talked about earlier in the Nation series. The British Commonwealth or France declare war on a neutral minor. It's minus 8 to the American income, and that's a big deal. So you know, not only are they paying 10 IPP penalty for attacking a neutral, but the Americans also have to take the minus 8 hit on their income. So that is all of the peacetime income increases and the one decrease, of course. But there is one wartime bonus, just one, and it's a big one. So if you own all of the lower 48, they're called, they're the American home country. So Western United States right there, and the Eastern United States over there. If you own all of those land zones, nobody's taking any of them, or nobody else owns any of them, then you get 12 IPP. Now somebody could take one and then you take it back, and then you would get your 12 bonus. There is a thing about about points where you would lose a point for that. But as long as you own all 12 of them, all of the states during the game, then you're still going to get that 12 bonus. So your income could go from 63 to 75. You know, unless you have also lost, like maybe Philippines or something. You know, like that's minus 2 right there or whatever, right? So anyway, that's your income, your peacetime income increases and your wartime income bonus. One of the things that sets the Americans apart in this game from the other nations is like I spoke about it earlier, how they really didn't want to have any part of the war, so they're a long ways away from it. Like there's a lot of things that have to happen in order for them to go to war. But I mean, it'd be pretty boring if you were the American player if you did nothing, you know, for the first 2/3 of the game, right? So at different various income levels, they give you things that you're allowed to do, like stuff that is moving you closer to war, or even wartime type actions that you can take. You'll see once I list them, depending on what your income level is. When you're at 6, you can't do anything. You basically just sit there and collect money and build units, right? Spend your money, I guess. So this is what you can do. Well, one thing you could do when you're at 6 is you could start rolling the dice for your technology, right? Like, you do have a number of major factories, and that's one thing that you might want to think about doing at that time, is upgrading something that wasn't a major factory, so you've got more dice rolls. But anyway, for your income determined actions, at 15 IPP you could close the Panama Canal to other powers. Now that's a slight change. Like I was mentioned at the top of the video here, there are slight changes to the rules. In the version 2 of the rules, it said you could close the Panama Canal here. So there's a canal here where you can sail ships through there, and then you can go from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and from the Pacific to the Atlantic. That said in version 2 that you could only close it to the Axis. In this, it says you could close it to all powers. So there's a bit of a distinction there. Now, I don't see it closing it to the British or the French, but you might want to close it to the Russians, right? So that's something that you can do now. And also at 15 IPP, that's when you can start lend-leasing to nations that are at war with a major power. So you can start lending money to people at that point. It does take you a couple of turns to get up to 15, but there's only a couple of actions that need to happen before you get up to that point, and then you are a part of the game. And lend leasing is a big thing that you can do, like helping keep the allies in it, or maybe it's even in your best interest to help keep the Russians in it, depending on what's going on in your game, right? So at 35 IPP, once your income level reaches 35, you can move ships in the Pacific and build facilities and send units to Pacific Islands. Units moving to Pacific Islands must end movement in or bordering U.S. land zones. So that's slightly different too than what it said in version 2. In version 2, it says you can reinforce Pacific Islands, so you could send units, militia, bases, and fortifications. But it said U.S. Pacific Fleet may move in Pacific to Hawaii. So the difference here that I see is that you can actually move around the Pacific, but that you have to end your movement. Here, let me just take you over there. You would have to end your movement. Like, you could move the whole Pacific Fleet there to Philippines if you wanted. But that's only if you could get there. Like, you could go to Hawaii, then you could go to Wake, then you could go to here, and then you could go to here. Like, you could end your movement there, but they have to be, here's another American one, it has to be an American territory that you end your movement in. So like the sea zone isn't American, but like this sea zone here would be a bordering an American territory, right? So basically the sea zone surrounding whatever island that you're talking about there. And the other thing is, and this is the same for both of them, may perform escort duty for Allied convoy lines in the Atlantic Ocean. So that's something that you can do, and something that'll be a big help to the British if the Germans are really active. Like, hopefully the British can take care of the convoy lines, but if not, then the least you could do is send destroyers out there and stuff, right? To provide escort, or to do escort duty for you. Anyway, so then let me just take a quick look here. Yeah, no, that was the same in the last version of the rules anyway as well. Okay, then at 50 IPP, it says you may engage in combat with German and Italian forces in sea zones within 2 zones of the U.S. East Coast without a declaration of war. In the last version, it said U.S. and Germany may engage in naval combat within 2 zones of U.S. coast. So that's slightly changed as well. Now you can get into combat with Italians as well. So off the east coast of America there, if they're within 2 zones. And if they do specify the East Coast, they probably meant the East Coast in the version 2 and just didn't write it. But this time they specified East Coast instead of just Coast, because the Germans are probably not going to be near the west coast of the United States. And then at 63 IPP, it says that you can declare war. And you can move ships between the Atlantic and the Pacific. So before you reach that 63, you cannot go with these ships here over to the Pacific Ocean, okay? You have to wait until you're at 63 IPP. And the same holds true for these ships over here. If it's these ships or ships that you built over here, you can't take them to the Atlantic side until you're at 63 IPP, okay? And then there is one more thing that I'd like to talk about, and let me just find it here. And that is the United States Special Abilities. There's a couple of them here. One of them is called Call to Arms. So the first time any enemy land unit attacks a U.S. home country, all regular infantry cost 2 IPP and militia cost 1 IPP during the next U.S. production phase. So it doesn't say occupy, it says attacks it. So say that Japan comes over with transports and they try to assault any one of these land zones. Even if they don't take it, then the next turn the Americans can build infantry for -1. Just regular infantry though, like not Marines or mountain infantry or anything like that. Just regular infantry. They can build for 2 IPP, and the militia they can build for 1. And that's all over the United States, not just where I'm showing you there, but on the East Coast as well. Then there's another one. There's American Army Nation Guard Mobilization. So as soon as the USA is at war with a major power, place 4 infantry in the place units box. So this is what they're talking about here, is the place units box. Myself, I don't really use that for the ground troops. I just use it for the build chart. Like what I would do is I would just put it on the American coaster where the money is, you know, where I'm about to spend the money. That's usually where my builds go. But, you know, technically with the game, like that's where you're supposed to put it, is on the place units box. But just, you know, like for ease, we all just put them on the coasters that you can get at HBG, because then, you know, like you can build it ahead of time and stuff like that, right? You're all ready to go when your turn goes, and that's why we do that. And then the last thing is Canadian factories. So Great Britain may receive Lend-Lease IPPs and equipment from the USA at any Canadian factory site. So there's really only one right now, and I doubt that you're going to build any more factories for the Canadians, but you can send Lend-Lease to this factory up here, and it says either IPPs or equipment. So you could send whatever you want up there. And of course that's a big advantage, because there's probably going to be a number of subs in the water out here, right? And they have the ability to sink whatever you're trying to send over, if you were trying to send it over to Great Britain here, right? So you would just get them at that factory over there, and then they're yours, right? The money or the units. So that's the special abilities. So let's just get to the victory objectives, and I haven't gone through them all for everybody, but I'm going to go through these ones because there's been a number of changes to the American ones. So the ones that haven't changed are the Monroe Doctrine. So you score 1 victory objective if there are no Axis or Comintern land units in North, South, or Central America game end, and no land zone in the U.S. home country has been in possession of an Axis or Comintern nation during the game at any time. So even at, you know, like any turn there, say the Japanese had managed to get 1 land zone and then you took it right back, that takes out that point. Like you can't lose any land zone in the United States home country at all during the game, or it counts against that point. And at the end of the game, the Monroe Doctrine can't be violated. So as long as the Americans, like even if somebody had taken over a land zone over there in South America, as long as the Americans had taken it back and it's not in possession of the Comintern or of the Axis, then they can get that point. The next one is Pacific security. So you score 1 victory objective if the U.S. ends the game with twice as many capital ships in the Pacific as Japan, and the United States gets to go last. So that's something that they definitely have control over. Like, you'd really be falling down if you didn't score that point, because you could just see how many capital ships that the Japanese have, and you could be building capital ships, and they could be sitting right here, and then on the last turn of the game, the last thing you do is you put them in the place units, you pay them off, and so they go on the board. So you should be able to get that one. You should be able to double the number of Japanese capital ships in the Pacific, because you'll see how many there are, and then do they have any on the build chart? Like, how many are there going to be, right? You might have to go kill a few of them on the last turn too, right? It just depends on the game that you're playing. Anyway, there's also maintain the empire. That hasn't changed. So you score 1 victory objective if the U.S. ends the game in possession of all its original land zones as of 36. So it's not just your home country. It's also Alaska. It's all of the islands here, the Pacific Islands. Like, you have to own all of them. And if you do own all of them, then you get a point for that. And then technological superiority, that hasn't changed either. So you score 1 victory objective if the U.S. has heavy bombers, jet fighters, strategic rockets, and long-range aircraft technology developed. Not started, but finished developing. So the ones that have changed are contain fascism. So before it was you scored 1 victory objective if Germany and Italy are within their borders as the start of the scenario. So the new rule is you score 1 victory objective at the end of the game if Germany and Italy are at or below their 1939 starting income. So Germany's is 25 and Italy's is 10. Now, like, they could have taken territories outside of their originally controlled territories, right? So as long as Italy still has 10 IPP income, you know what I mean? Or as long as they have 10 or below, then that's good for the Americans. Or the Germans have 24 or below. It doesn't matter what 24 they are, as long as they are that at or below, and that's Germany and Italy. I think I explained that right. I almost confused myself there. But anyway, like, all I'm saying is they don't have to be originally controlled territories as long as that's where their income level is. And that's not including bonuses. That's just the how much their territories are worth, okay? And then the other one is contain communism. So that one's slightly changed too. The old one was score 1 victory objective if worldwide there are less than 3 new nations or former colonies possessed by the Comintern at the end of the game. Now the new one says, score 1 victory objective if the USSR ends the game in possession of less than 5 new land zones with an IPP value. So that you can see the slight subtle difference there, right? Before it was just 3 land zones. It didn't matter if they had a point value or not. And the new one is it's less than 5, so 4 or less. Land zones that have a point value. So slight difference there, but a meaningful one. So like I said, there's changes like that you wouldn't necessarily notice. Like, like your brain just goes by, oh yeah, there was that one, yeah. But it wasn't exactly that, right? It's actually something different. So you have to actually read these things. Anyway, we'll be right back. America only has one specialized unit, and it's probably the one that they could use the most anyway. That's this guy right here, the United States Marine Corps. Now, the United States also has Marines, like everybody else on the board does, and that Marine attacks at 2, defends at 4. He doesn't suffer a river penalty, and he doesn't suffer double casualties on the first round of an amphibious assault. This guy mirrors that. He has the same attributes, except that he attacks at 3 and defends at 5. So he's an elite Marine is what he is. Just like the Special Navy Landing Force for the Japanese, right? just a kicked up Marine. And so this guy here is costing 4, this guy's costing 5. And you can build 2 of them per turn, just like all your specialist infantry. You know, whether that's a Marine or an elite Marine or a mountain infantry, you're only allowed to build your specialist infantry at 2 at a time. And then the last thing to tell you about is the strategic naval movement. And that is, just to remind you, that's from friendly naval port to friendly naval port. And it's 5 spaces on non-combat move. And it's either transports or the stuff that they are transporting. Okay, it's nothing else. It's no warships, no submarines, nothing like that. It's just transports and the stuff that they are transporting. So this works out better for the Americans and the Japanese than anybody. And I'd like to see people use this rule, because the United States, if the Axis are playing a good game, they don't get into it until it's too late, right? And this at least gives them a chance to do a couple of attacks against Europe, or a couple of attacks against Japan. You know, like they could send send 4 transports across the water that are fully loaded, right? And then have another 4 transports coming across while these transports are attacking, and then have the 4 transports that have unloaded last turn, they can all go 5 spaces, right? So they're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 back to New York and getting loaded again, right? While the other transports are attacking over here. It's called a transport shuck. It's something that we've been using for years and years, playing these types of games. So, you know, that's something that is good for them, and it's good for the Japanese as well. You know, like if the Japanese wanted to assault the American homeland, or, you know, the FEC or wherever, they could bring their transports all the way back to Japan and get more units as well with that, you know, like 5 space movement for the transports, right? So that's it. That's all of it. But I'd like to talk a little bit about America, though. It's a pretty interesting nation to play. I tell you what we like to do. It is a big nation, right? And there's a lot involved in it. So we like to let a new player play the Americans, because you don't really do much for the first 2 days. Like if you're taking 3 days to play this game, excuse me, if it takes you 3 days to play this game, like it usually does for us, like we'll get faster eventually, but the first 2 days, the Americans are not going to be at war with anybody, you know, but they still will be involved. Like they'll be land leasing and doing things like that. So what happens is, with a new player, you know, like you're just telling them, okay, I need you to lend lease me this, and this is how you do it and everything. But while they're there, they're not just doing nothing. Like you can let them play China as well, right? The KMT, so that they're doing a little bit of attacking and stuff, you know, learning how to do that. But they're part of the game, and they're part of a big nation. So on the 3rd day, after watching people play it for 2 full days, we're talking like 8-10 hours a day, and really absorbing what's going on around the board, and getting the hang of it and everything. Then on the 3rd day, then they're taking over, and they're a big part of the game. Like one of the biggest parts of the game. It's the biggest thing that happens on the 3rd day, is America starts steaming across the water on both sides, right? If their navy hasn't been wiped out. So that's something you got to watch out for, because that happened to me twice. I think I mentioned it earlier. I don't know, it might have been part of the segments that I deleted earlier too. I make these in segments and I delete them and everything. Anyway, basically you do not want to put all your American Navy in one zone, because the Japanese will come across with their first strike or their surprise strike and wipe out your whole Navy. They've got first strike with their airplanes, and they've got 1 extra movement with their ships. And the Americans, or whoever they're attacking, are all -1. But that's only in one spot. You know, either it's a land zone or a sea zone. But if you put all of your ships in one sea zone, then they can come across, and it's not that tough. Like there's still quite a bit of Japanese late Navy left, I've found. Both times I got wiped out, they still had quite a few ships left. Like you wouldn't believe how surprisingly easy it is to wipe out somebody when they've got that much of an advantage for one turn. So what you want to do is you want to spread the Navy out between 3 or 4 different places at least 3, maybe 4 different places. That way, they can only attack. I mean, they can attack all 3 or 4 of those places, right? But only one of them they're going to have that advantage. So don't put all your good ships in one place and then all your crappy ships in a bunch of other places, right? Like spread them out. Spread out your battleships. Spread out your carriers. Spread out your destroyers and your cruisers. Like just kind of make it as even as you can everywhere, so that one target isn't juicier than the other. Then maybe the Japanese decide to go for something else. Maybe they decide to go for Calcutta or something else. They might still try to go after you with a surprise strike, but at least the odds are even when they're going at the other places. It's only the one place where they're going to have an advantage. So there you go. The other thing that America could be doing for the first 2/3 of the game is lend-leasing. Lend-leasing to the Commonwealth and to the Free French. Like the Free French is that's something that would be a real help, wouldn't it? That way the Commonwealth is freed up to use their money. I mean, they're on their heels the whole game, right? And so the Free French are going to need help, and so it'd be natural for the Americans to lend-lease them a unit every turn, whether it's just an infantry for $3 or a tank they can lend-lease them a tank. It's France that can't build a tank, right? They have to build off the minor chart, but I mean the Americans can lend-lease them whatever they want, right? So lend-leasing them because that gives them a better chance to fight the Vichy. The Germans are probably going to be feeding the Vichy 1 unit per turn. So if the Americans can, and then the Commonwealth can feed them the odd unit, that would give them the upper hand against the Vichy, right? So there's that. There's lend-leasing through the Canadian factory up there. But just remember, you can only lend-lease to the Commonwealth once, right? Like you can't lend-lease to Great Britain and lend-lease to Anzac. I tell you, I love lend-leasing to Anzac because Anzac doesn't have much money, but they could be a real asset to the Americans on this side of the board, because there's nothing stopping the Japanese, right? What I like to do is send a plane down, some of the big ticket items that takes 2 turns for these guys to save up for, right? Like these guys could be buying submarines or something and maybe infantry or whatever to shore up the land, where the Americans are sending down the big ticket items. I mean, they could even send down capital ships, right? What they would do is, like, you just put an American capital ship down and then they pay to move it along. And then when the last payment, when they make it, that's when they would make it Anzac. So they don't even know that this ship over here is going to be Anzac when it goes on. Now that could be a battleship or it could be a carrier. It could be a cruiser like this. You put a cruiser down that looks American, and then you take that off and you put the Anzac cruiser on over here. They just bought Anzac a cruiser. It's only on the last stage that they need to designate who that's going to. I had that wrong, and so I'm actually making this video the next morning. I thought that they would have to put an Anzac thing down here and move it along, and then the Japanese would know when it was coming, but that's not the case. It's just you put the American down, move them along, and then move them and switch them to Anzac here, and then he goes on the board at the same time, or on the same turn, I mean. So that's really interesting and really helpful as well for Anzac. I mean, you could lend-lease the FEC something as well, but definitely try to give the Free French something, even if it's just a militia, $2, like throw them a bone, right? Anything to help them out in their war against the Vichy. And if you can, try to lend-lease the British. The British could use some help up there too, right? So lend-leasing them, like take a look at how much money you have and everything. So you can lend-lease somebody half of their income or a unit, right? So if the British income is like 28, say, then I mean lending them $14 is better than lending them just a fighter, right? Because for $14 they could buy a fighter and colonial infantry, right? Or they could buy 2 seaplanes, you know what I mean? So just take a look at how much money you have to give them and everything, and decide whether it would be better to give them a unit or to give them the money. Like with ANZAC, definitely you want to give them the unit because their income is so low that they would hardly be giving them any money at all, right? So you might as well give them a unit because then at least you can give them something of value, right? You know, like even if you just give them a destroyer, that's more than you would be able to give them in money for sure, right? So there's that. And Soviet Union, you know, like you're supposed to lend lease to the Soviet Union, but I'd be careful with that because if the Soviets win the game, you lose the game if you're the American player, right? But at the same time, you want to keep them in the game, don't you? Like you want them to be strong against the Germans, and you want them to be strong against the Japanese, but you don't want them to be too strong. And the other thing is, we talked about earlier in the Nation series about these guys being a dick, right? Like they got to be a dick in order to win the game. But if they're being a real dick, like they're not playing ball with you at all. They're taking all, you know, like they're taking your bonus down there for the Great Britain in Iraq, and they're just generally, you know, not caring whatsoever about the Allies. You know, that they're signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which is not in your best interest and stuff like that. Then you know what? Take away their lend-lease here. You're the one that gets to decide on their lend-lease. Take away their lend-lease and don't give them any lend-lease. That's something that you can hold over them. Say, hey, listen, unless you start pretending at least that you're on our side, I'm not going to give you anything. You know, you're not going to get that $2, and I'm not going to give you anything. But you know what? If you attack them now, then I'll send you over, like, what do you need? A tank? I'll send you a tank. You know, maybe the Americans have heavy tank technology or something. You know, they could send them a heavy tank. It just depends, right? Like, use your lend-lease. Use it to your advantage, right? With the Russians. Don't just use it to bolster them because they're not on your side. It's a three-way game. So, you know, there's a lot that the Americans can do in this game. It's they just got to be a little bit more creative, you know, because they're not necessarily in the first 2/3 of the game. They're not necessarily just battling, right? They're being a banker, you know, and that was their role, right, in the war until they got into it. So it could be a fun nation to play if you really get yourself engaged. If you just sit away from the tables because you don't have anything to do or anything, you know, then you're not going to have as much fun. But if you engage, you watch what's going on and everything, you can actually help dictate what goes on the table with that big income that you're eventually going to have, right? Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've only got one more to make. I've already started the preparations. You can see I've taken all the Chinese off the board. So the video I'll be making after I start uploading this one is China. Anyway, this has been America, so take care everyone. General Hand Grenade out.